Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. On this channel, we oftentimes sign off with a famous line from Revenge of the Sith, and it's said by Obi-Wan Kenobi. It goes like this: "My allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy." And you can stop choking your wife. Anyone who's seen that movie and understands the background context understands that this line is not a declaration of victory, but the last pitiful cry of a servant of the old failed ways. Obi-Wan Kenobi is a devout and loyal soldier for the Jedi Order, and throughout his career he has defended the Republic and its values with a high degree of honor and dedication. In my opinion, actually, Obi-Wan Kenobi was never really the problem. It was the Republic and democracy that failed them by electing into office as an evil Sith Lord. And in this moment, as Obi-Wan Kenobi's world burns down around him as he realizes his own apprentice, the young boy he's mentored for a decade now, has joined the side of the Empire, this is all he can think to say.
"Anakin, my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy!"
Why would he say that when clearly democracy has been defeated? Is it stubbornness? Is it his refusal to accept what has happened? Or is it something entirely different? I think Obi-Wan Kenobi isn't making a political statement in that moment. He's making a moral declaration. You know, democracy is not just this broad political ideology. For those who believe it, I think, it transcends just politics, right? It's far more philosophical. The core principle of democracy is this idea that every person, every sentient being in the galaxy matters. Whether they live in the core regions or in the outer rim, whether they're human or even something, more degenerate like a Twi'lek or, God forbid, Rodian. This is a core belief of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and core beliefs don't change simply when the government changes or society collapses. And I'll be honest, there's parts of my own personality that are highly undemocratic. I oftentimes am very skeptical about how people vote. I feel like a lot of people don't vote for their own interest because they don't understand the policies that they are voting for. And, when I get frustrated or I get angry, I have a bad day, that side of my personality turns into something a lot darker. So I become very elitist. I get the sense that I know what I'm doing, that everyone else is an idiot, which of course is how authoritarians think, right? I'm not a natural adherent to democratic ideas. And that cynicism that I have for the system, I earned it, like many of you guys have. My path was spending a decade working in news media. I covered rallies, protests, and campaigns at every level of government. I've been to Democratic primaries. I've also been to Republican primaries. I'm not naive about the downsides of power sharing. I just understand that when democracies fail, the consequences are even more terrifying. And oftentimes, the only way a democracy collapses is when the people inside of that system stop believing in it. Because the democracy is one of the only systems where investing in people actually makes the system stronger. When policies focus on making citizens educated, economically secure, and capable of critical thought, democracies become more resilient, more adaptable, and harder to break. In most other systems, an empowered populace is a major threat. In a democracy, that is the entire point. It is the most courageous form of government because it is the only form of government that only allows for peaceful transfer of power to another administration. It desperately depends on it to facilitate trust and cohesion amongst the many diverse parties that make up a democracy. But when we as a society stop trusting each other and we refuse to have civil discourse over many of the issues that plague our society, when we give up on each other, that is when we also give up on this grand experiment. And when we return to the unfortunate norm that humanity has always faced: tyranny, fear, division, violence. Democracies and the societies that nurture them are incredibly rare in the longer view of history. And they're oftentimes very fragile. They come once in a blue moon. They're like a garden planet perched on the edges of two gigantic black holes. There's a very thin band of travel that you could take for stability. If you veer too far in one direction to one extreme, everything collapses. Everything is consumed. A democratic society is an extremely precious thing. And so this is why I love this line from Obi-Wan Kenobi. A true defender of democracy does not shake in their resolve even as the world collapses around them. Because democracy, civilization, it heavily depends on the optimism of people like him who will do anything to keep that idea alive. Such voices are even more important when darkness spreads across the land, as the Empire did, with its tyranny, fear, corruption, and cynicism poisoning everything it runs across, destroying hope and turning people against each other. Let's be real for a second, Realistically speaking, none of us are Obi-Wan Kenobi. None of us have perfected Form 3 of the defensive shell lightsaber technique and, run around the galaxy swooping up baddies. Obi-Wan Kenobi is the final form, and, it's fine. Hopefully I'll get there one day. Who knows? But what about now? What about the rest of us who are sitting at home feeling helpless as we see the world around us burning? Massacres, violence, war, conflict, injustice. Well, we always talk about how George Lucas created Star Wars as a myth that could introduce audience to some basic moral values and principles. The original trilogy was heavily focused on the hero's journey of Luke and was designed to give courage and guidance to a new generation of kids who were growing up in a rapidly changing and transforming world. With the prequel trilogy, we get a warning of how democracies can backslide when they become inundated with corruption from corporate interests, and when the populace begins to fear each other and relinquish power to a strongman populace. It's a space opera, but it's also like a civics lesson. Now, I think the message, the civics lesson part of the prequel trilogy isn't as impactful because most of the characters who are making the decisions and making things happen on screen, they're all like hero units, right? They're generals, princesses, Jedi, stuff like that. Individuals who are immensely powerful and actually have a legitimate shot at changing the entire galaxy. Individuals like Obi-Wan Kenobi. And that kind of seems not so relevant to the average person today, right? Even those of us who live in a democratic system, one vote seems insignificant in the grander scheme of things. Well, this is where Disney Star Wars comes into play. Believe it or not. Disney for decades now has pushed this core ideology that emphasizes that individuals matter by focusing on personal empowerment, agency, and following your dreams. It's like half corporate slop, but there is actually a very powerful message in there. And then when you combine that mentality with Star Wars, well, something magical happens. Suddenly, instead of focusing on the hero units like we see in the sequel trilogy, we have Rogue One. For we're taking a look at the heroics of the grunts on the ground. The most forgotten of the forgotten in any intergalactic war. The rebel infantry. They don't get fancy warships or X-Wings. I mean, heck, they don't look technologically speaking that much more advanced than the soldiers we sent to Nam. Rogue One was the last kind of movie I expected Disney to make with the Star Wars IP. This was a gritty war drama that features a cast of no-name characters who all will be dead when the curtains drop. And boy, did the audience cheer when the curtains did drop. Rogue One, which is essentially a side mission that branches off from the original Star Wars film, somehow defeated the mainstream Skywalker saga sequel trilogy in popularity. Not because it expanded Star Wars lore or added to our understanding of the Force. I don't even think it was because of the amazing action and war scenes. I think the success of that show was directly connected to the fact that the people on screen who are devoted to destroying tyranny are not armed with special powers or a mandate from the people or the Force gods. These are just your average Joes and Janes. Very mortal, fragile individuals. Some of them might have a criminal background. And these folks manage to put aside their differences, and they all decide to sacrifice their lives to get those Death Star plans across the finish line. One final epic drive. No fancy tricks, no fancy plays, just running the ball between the tackles. An excellent exercise of pure determination and grit. The Rogue One ground team that volunteers for the suicide mission on the ground are made up of nobodies. Cassian Andor, an orphan, street urchin, turned revolutionary, Baze, Malbus, and Shured Imwe, guardians of a temple that no longer was functioning. Bodhi Rook, just a regular Imperial transport pilot who rises to the occasion. Then we have a detachment of Marines, including Aro Bastanera, the son of farmers on the agri-world of Ertigas, who sharpened his eyesight as a child looking for scavengers who might do damage to his family's crops. He turns that skill into becoming a spotter for a sniper team. We also have Jav Mefrin, 4th Special Forces Regiment. He specialized in fighting and surviving in jungle and rainforest environments. And although Mefrin had many misgivings about volunteering for the Rogue One team, the sight of Scarif's beautiful tropical environments gave him courage. He would expertly lead one of the main distraction teams and fell defending Bodhi Rook as he desperately tried to open communications with the Alliance fleet above. There's also General Antog Merrick, who manages to lead the only air asset that makes it through the shield gate to support ground units during the Battle of Scarif. Outnumbered and overwhelmed, he fights to the very bitter end, buying just enough time for the ground team to steal the plans. I mean, he chose to step into the cockpit of a X-Wing and lead that mission despite being the creator and founder of the entire Rebel Starfighter Corps, a position that allows him to be in the rear. But how can one fight for equality when you ask others to die in your place, especially when you know you're the person with the right skills for this specific mission? There's also Captain Kato Ukon of the Lightmaker. When given the order to ram the disabled Star Destroyer Persecutor over Scarif, he evacuates his ship of everyone but a skeleton crew on the bridge and directly commands the maneuver himself, leading to the destruction of 2 entire Star Destroyers and the shield gate that trapped the Rogue One team and prevented them from transmitting the plans. And then at the very last moment, when victory and also defeat are a possibility, there's a group of Alderaanian consular security guards, diplomatic personnel, not soldiers, who held the line against the most feared Sith Lord in the galaxy, Darth Vader. We as fans are wowed by the destruction a single Sith Lord can bring to a group of mere mortals, but ultimately Vader doesn't get the plans. The Alderaanians somehow miraculously hold just long enough to transfer the plans to a barely space-worthy CR-90. And as they all die a horrible death in that terrifying red tunnel, Hope escapes and survives. Rogue One is built on the simple and beautiful premise that history is not made by just people with big names, Skywalker, Mothma, Trevor. The people who actually do the work, who contribute the most, are just a collection of ordinary folks who decide in one irreversible moment to do something extraordinary, to take matters in their own hands and believe that they can make a difference. None of those people are supposed to matter. None of their names were prophesized, in some ancient texts. These weren't famous individuals, and most of them didn't even believe they would survive the mission. But democracy, rebellions, and freedom have always depended on people exactly like this. Citizens who step forward not because they're perfect, not even because they planned on doing something, but just because the moment demands them to be bigger and better than they once were. And what's our jobs, those of us left behind? Well, it's simple. We're supposed to be moved. We're supposed to be inspired by the individuals who make the ultimate sacrifice, especially those individuals. It's our responsibility to make sure that their sacrifices are not made in vain. Because when a person gives their life for liberty, freedom, democracy, it's a gift for all of us. It's a gift for humanity. It's a gift that transcends politics and partisanships. It's a part of a philosophy that says, hey man, I believe that every life matters. Doesn't matter what your political views are, what your religion is, what your ethnicity is, what your immigration status is, right? I feel like we used to understand that as a country. And maybe we still do. Be pretty good if we did. Pretty good.